नमस्कार, मैं अशोक व्यास. कार्यक्रम इनसाइड टुनाइट द अशोक व्यास में आपका स्वागत है. वी लव टू हैव fun. When I say that, there is a sense of celebrating life in different ways at different stages. If there is somebody's birthday, we celebrate. If somebody gets married, we celebrate. There are different sanskaras laid out also to mark important developments in our lives. That also includes the last stage, which we are normally scared of even in referring or talking about, and that is what courageously we are making an attempt to understand how to deal with death. Yes, death is the word that we are scared of. We are afraid that one day we are going to go away. And many times we find it difficult if somebody very dear to us leaves his body form, or he is not available for us to communicate, to interact, to celebrate life with. And that becomes a very, very difficult space for us to fill based on the way we have been related to that person. So it is a universal phenomenon. Each one of us either have experienced it or is bound to experience it at some stage. So we thought of trying to understand how to deal with death and what is it that we understand by this word death. So we thought of going from the biological side to the spiritual side and whatever is there in between, in the form of emotions, in the form of various associations that makes its meaning appear to us in different colors. So I take this opportunity of first welcoming someone who might have seen people take their last breath. As an individual also, all of us have been at the stage where we know what death makes us feel. So I take this opportunity to thank and welcome Dr. Narinder Kukar for joining us to talk about this important theme. Dr. Sahab, swagat hai aapka. I am also delighted that I have the pleasure of the presence of someone who started sincerely exploring the meaning of life, and somehow who am I question took him under the fold of Bhagwan Raman Maharshi at very early age, and for last 40 years he has constantly 24/7 been a part of the unfolding of this understanding and this awareness of what is life in its true sense. And President of Arunachal Ashram, New York, Dennis Hartel, joins us for the first time at ITV studio. Welcome. Namaskar. With him we also have someone who considers himself as devotee of Bhagwan Raman Maharshi. When I say consider, of course he is a devotee, but that is how he wants to introduce, or he introduces himself. So with a lot of gratefulness, I welcome Bandhuji to our studio. Namaste. Bandhuji, I want to begin with you. As a child, I remember a point when, for the first time, another friend of mine whispered in my ears about an elderly person, as if it was a new thing, and it indeed was a new thing. And for the first time, I heard the word death in such a palpable manner from that friend of mine. In your case, when the awareness of death became a part of your experience?
The awareness of death becoming part of my life would probably, if I try and recall, would be when I had an experience of trying to be in the hospital with one of my relatives, and for the first time I was the one who was standing next to that relative when he breathed his last. and then I had to break the news to the other close family members. That was probably the first experience. But earlier to that, this happened, the incident that I just narrated happened when I was probably 20. But prior to that, when I was a young boy, my father would read the talks or would read excerpts from some books or articles published in Mountain Path, published by Sri Ramanashram of Tiruvannamalai. And there he had talked to me and read me, excuse me, the death experience that Bhagwan had experienced in his teenage years. So that was a philosophical, a spiritual relationship to death in my mind. But as a practical experience, to answer your question, was the other incident that I related.
So, Dr. Kukar Sahab, as a social being and as a doctor, do you look at death differently?
We all look at death differently. Who is it who expired? How close were you and I to him? How was my relationship? What my dependency on that? I think Bhagavad Gita describes it very well. The one who feels the most is the one whose loss is the greatest. So as a person, that is one. But as a doctor, to us, every death is a traumatic experience, not only to the family, but to a physician. It sometimes a kind of a failing where you failed. Although this is one of the things that we teach even the younger doctors, that please, it is not your failing. You tried your best. Things didn't work out. That doesn't mean you are no good. Okay? So death, technically speaking, depends who expired, how close you are. But as a physician, it's a totally different ball game, because we feel the sorrow of every patient who goes, because we see the family there and the family is concerned. The question sometimes comes is, how do you empathize and sympathize with the family? No words can express and explain that. However, your body language can convey your empathy, your sorrowness, and a touch of a hand to the touch of a family member of the deceased can convey more than the words can ever convey.
Conveying that you understand is interesting. It happens at different levels, Dennis, I think. So for a Jnani, the meaning of death may be different, but if he is reaching out with that Jnana visible on his face, it may be offending to those who are grieving. Talk to me a little bit about your understanding in this context.
I'm not quite clear about what question that is.
The question is, if you, as we hear that soul never dies, and they say that that spirit is immortal, so if you have digested that understanding, that awareness through scriptures or through meditation and contemplation, then maybe you are at a different plane, and probably you don't feel the same kind of grief as others are feeling.
Well, generally everyone is afraid of death because they believe it's the extinction of being. But everyone daily experiences a mini death in sleep. There's no body. They leave their body. They sink into some darkness. But it's a refreshing darkness. In fact, if they go 24 hours without it, they feel unsettled in life. So that's like a mini death. There's no body awareness. There's even no sense of individuality. That is death. That's death for the individual. But he knows he's going to wake up, so he's not afraid of it. but he wants it. He even takes pills to induce it. So that's what death is like. So the thing is, in that place, in deep sleep, there's no awareness, but there is peace. And the peace is the essence of your state, your natural state is peace. And when we have no thoughts, and we sink into sleep consciously, with awareness, then we enter the state of deathless being, with full awareness and perfect happiness and fulfillment. That's the process that Ramana Maharshi went through at the age of 16. He was, all of a sudden he felt he was going to die. Now there's no reason for that, he was healthy. But he said, death is imminent, we're going to die, everyone's going to die, and I'm going to die, so what is death? So he lay down on a bed, and with one pointed mind, he said, okay, I'm dying. He stopped his breath, like your breath stops when you die. He stopped his mind. He stopped thinking. He says, okay, there's no thought. He's not saying this consciously, but this is what his awareness was. There's no thought. There's no breath. Rigor mortis will set in on the body. But what exists still? And what exists after all this is left my awareness? There's no body awareness. There's no breath. There's no even I, but the I is there. The awareness of the being is there. So there's no thought, but still I am there. So what is that I? Where does it come from? What is the source of that I? Where does it rise from? So he just sunk deeper and deeper into the awareness of that I, that individual I. Then he sunk into that universal I from where that individual I springs forth. Now that was real death, the death of the ego. In that death, you gain everything. You become what you are, your natural state. You become perfect in awareness. You realize your universal oneness with everything. There's no second. There's only the self, the pure self. So that was death for Ramana Maharshi. But that death became his true life. Then he said later, I didn't realize who I was, only then I knew who I was. Now he never read any scripture. He never heard about Brahman and Atman, or never was giving any teaching, but he just wanted to find out what death was. And in that process of seeking the answer to what death was, he realized his true nature, which was the deathless being. So that's the true death, the death of the individual. Until that's gone, there's going to be death and there's going to be birth, and there's going to be death and there's going to be birth, until we realize our true nature, which is deathless. So one who's a seeker of truth tries to understand who they are in essence, tries to still the mind and look deep within themselves. So once one has done that, one gets perfect fulfillment of life. And they know who they are, and they're free, and they can live in the world without any hindrances, like a child. So that's my understanding of death.
That understanding of death coming from the experience of Bhagavan Dhaman Maharshi, where Dennis refers to that which is beginning of real life by understanding one's true nature. Very few of us are given to that contemplation and that kind of awareness. Most of us, Bandhuji, if you may allow me to say, are always longing to acquire this, or we are hankering to get more material objects and successes, and so anything that takes us away from the rhythm of getting more or trying to get more, we don't like it. We don't like it. So for us, death is a full stop on our process of trying to accumulate more, say, wealth or assets or success, name, etc. So death word seemed to have different meaning for different people based on their nature. Do you agree?
I think it brings us to a very good point in this discussion where death is only an interval between the activity of this life as we as mortals see it, and we, those who are seekers, are trying to understand the meaning of this life. So death is only an interval, a halt in that cycle of life and death that actually eventually should subside and completely cease to happen again. So if death were permanent, that is liberation. So when death occurs, it's a point, it's a day in life to rejoice, because it has ended and brought just a halt in the activity, the worldly activity that you're continuing to do. And so death is something to be welcomed, something not to be pathetic about, but to say that, okay, this one cycle has ended. Hopefully it ends forever. But unfortunately, because of our vasanas, we are born again and again and again and again. And we've been born for millions of years. So, like Nachiketa in Katha Upanishad, asks his father, so whom shall you give me to? You're giving away these cows, which are going to be a burden on these poor people. Whom shall you give me to? And father, out of anger, when he asks the third time, says, I give you to death. And he goes and waits at Yama's and waits for 3 days in the boons, and we all know that story. So the understanding that he gets from Yama about death is that it is the awareness, it is the knowledge of the self that can bring you beyond the cycle of life and death. So, and that's what it is, and it should not be a life of material possessions. It should be a life of giving away possessions. It should be a life of giving away attachment. It should be a life of giving away all the speech and my mind, the activity of the mind, and to try and find quietude, so that, as Dennis said earlier, so that we can find and seek the truth within.
Try and seek the truth within, and the place from where Bandhuji is expressing, it may be not a very familiar space for many of us, because we look at life with the beauty which is unfolded by our emotional attachment, if not to objects, to people also. Talking about this side of life, Dr. Kukar, from the point of view of emotional vacuum, which when somebody departs is experienced by those who are dear to him, be it husband, wife, father, son, brother. They feel that vacuum, and it is very, very difficult for them to come to terms, and these words may not even reach to that mental state where one is experiencing this sense of helplessness, because the one who was around and you were used to deriving meaning because of his presence, it's not, he's not there, she's not there. What is your own experience in this context, and what would you like to say?
We all have lost near and dear ones, whether they be your family members, whether they be your friends. The one who is gone is gone. The one who is left are the ones who grieve. And that takes me to the grieving part. I think grieving is by the ones who are left behind, not in a bad sense, but in a good sense. We all are born for whatever reason. We all have a function to perform. Some do good deeds, some do lousy deeds. But once somebody is gone, which is near and dear to you, and then comes the question of grieving for them. And grieving is a very powerful and a wonderful thing that the ones behind should be proud of grieving, because it reflects your love for the person who went, it reflects your care and concern for those, and you are also concerned about what you can do ultimately for the good. So, in terms of death, I usually say the one who is gone is gone. He has no problem. And as some of my friends used to say from the Western world, he would say only the first 100 years of life are trouble. After that, it's all peaceful. Okay? So when somebody gets sick, somebody is ill, I say, well, that's a sign of life. Okay? That's a philosophical way of take it as it comes along and then works your way around. But the most important part is grieving. Grieving is a powerful thing done in the right fashion. It reflects love, it reflects affection, it also reflects your resolve to get along with life. Because those who are left behind, let's say somebody's father has expired. Now you as a child have a responsibility as a father to your child. You can't abandon that responsibility, but at the same time you have love for your father. So you have to show your love for your father, your respect for father, and these things are ingrained in society. Each person and society has its own individual way of grieving. Okay? And there are as many ways of grieving as there are human beings around. Okay? So whatever suits anyone, whether it's a 13-day of mourning at home, whether it's a 2-day of mourning at home, or whether it's 100 days of mourning at home, or whether it's going to a puja, or whether it's going to Haridwar, or whether you cremate, or whether you bury, or whether you do whatever you do with the departed loved one, everything is all right. It is whatever your heart desires, whatever you feel comfortable, and usually whatever becomes the norm of the society. And the norm of the society is sometimes dictated by the environment. In Japan at one time, if I'm not mistaken, burial was the way to go, because cremation was very expensive. Later on, because of constraints of space, and the cremation became cheaper, and therefore the cremation became the norm. You take the Western world here, cremation was a rare bird here. I remember in 1967, one of our colleagues died, okay, 67. I had just come to the country in 66. We were scrambling around to find a crematorium. Now you can find a crematorium all around, wherever you want. So things change, society changes and adopts itself. So grieving, I would say to everyone, the family members and friends should be proud to grieve. And we say to them, in another word, celebrate the life of a person who has gone. Okay, that's fair.
So looking at the relationship between death and grief, or grieving process, and I feel it would be unique for each individual based on his nature, etc. But now, as Dr. Kukar said, it's a powerful thing. It is powerful sometimes to the extent that one finds it difficult to continue with the day-to-day normal life as was the rhythm prior to this occurrence of someone's passing away. So, Dennis, if somebody comes to you and you realize that they are in the mode of intense grief, it is very difficult sometimes even to come up with right kind of words to offer a sense of strength to them. What would you say?
Well, God gives and God takes away. We didn't know, like our mother or our children before their birth, but they came into our family, they came into our environment. But we don't know after they leave us where they go. But while they're here, we attach ourselves to them. And because we attach ourselves to them, we consider them ours. And the nature of life is things constantly change. And what we grasp as our own will one day be taken away or dragged away from us at death. So if we believe everything belongs to God, we're all God's creatures. God brought us here, God takes us away. And where did they go away to? Where do they exist? If one knows that what is within us is the same that's in with you or every one of you, it's the same being, the same self. It exists now when you're in this form. It exists then when you're without that form. So if one centers oneself in that universal self, that being, then one doesn't see the physical form as being the person that leaves. That he's the self itself. Like a devotee sees God in all. Like you say, the jnani sees the self in all. So one doesn't feel possessive of that individual just because it's its child or its mother or father. So when it leaves, we understand that this is the natural progression of life. There's birth and there's death. Like he said, that the dead are happy. It's just those behind that grieve, that suffer. So we have the option, to suffer or not to suffer. We have the option to believe that everything comes from God and everything goes to God. Or everything comes from the self and everything goes to the self. But the nature of an individual is to grasp things for happiness. They believe by owning something, by using something, by possessing something, by acquiring something, will be happy. And they do acquire it, and they use it, and they derive some pleasure from it, but then that doesn't satisfy them completely. They go on to another thing, and they go through the same process, and that doesn't satisfy them completely. And that happiness that we experience as a result of that acquisition or that fulfillment of the desire is the happiness of the self. What happens, we intensely desire to fulfill some aspiration, we fulfill it. What happens? The mind becomes quiet. And the self, the peace of the self rises into the mind. We experience some of what our true nature is, which is natural peace. So if you go just towards the self and try to realize that natural peace, so whether there's gain or loss, you won't be affected by it. Otherwise, we're all going to be affected by gain and loss. That's the nature of life, or nature of humans.
So nature of life, if we are sincerely trying to understand, it probably helps. As very casually, or rather in effortless manner, Dennis said it is our option whether to suffer or not to suffer. We don't see that option, we don't exercise that option. Sometimes we feel that it is natural to suffer, and this is the only way that I have to suffer. So if we get to that point of strength by clarity, and we choose not to suffer, then what do we do? So is there some lesson which we learn from death? How our understanding and approach towards life may be more refined by certain lessons that come our way from that. We'll talk about that right after this short break. Stay with us. So, welcome back. You're watching Insight with the show, Vyas, and we are talking about an important theme which each one of us would like to avoid. We don't want to go near that gate, which is the gate of death, or probably we don't have to go. It comes to us, and we have this reference of Yamaraj coming. So, can we avoid it? If we cannot, what should we learn from this inevitable happening which is bound to happen? Let's hear Baba Nityanandji, who talked about the passing away of his guru, and here is how he opened.
I know it's something we all want to avoid, but it's not going to go away. It is but a natural part of life. Jatasya hi dhur mrityur dhudham janma mritasya cha, says the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. If you are born, it is but certain that you will die. And if you die, it is but certain that you will be reborn. And there is no way of avoiding this. I'm sure many of us, through our doctors and our insurance policies, would like to.
So I think we mixed the last point where he talked about how doctors come and they feel that they are offering a sense of assurance to the patients that don't worry, everything will be all right. So, Dr. Kukar, was there any occasion in your experience, maybe your direct experience or any of your colleagues' experience, where you felt that it is on that line where it could come to life, it could go to death, and dealing with that sensitive transition point as a doctor, how is that experience?
I think as a physician, all of physicians go through this quite often. In fact, maybe on a daily basis. The question comes, you have to be honest with the patient. But at the same time, make sure you don't take away the hope that the patient has and the family has. So we like to say to them, I am going to try my best. Let's hope for the best. And that by itself is a wonderful, appropriate statement. And sometimes we do feel that the family is unduly concerned. We don't see this. Then we may say, don't worry, I don't see anything, I think it's going to be fine. Are there times when we are very much worried? We don't think, at least I don't think it's appropriate, till it really becomes inevitable for me to say, oh, I'm sorry, your relative or your brother is going to die, okay? Only thing we say is, we're going to try our best, things don't look right, but sir, we will try our best, let's hope, okay? That's where it is, because hope sustains life. If you and I don't have hope, even though we are not sick, it won't sustain life. And that is what you see in patients who commit suicide. They are healthy people. They don't have hope. And that's coming from a non-psychiatrist. I'm not a psychiatrist, okay? So therefore, I would say it is a daily basis where you make those decisions. In fact, every physician, I think, makes a decision on the spot every day, so many times a day, that he even forgets how many times he has made that decision, because there's no luxury of time. It's not a lawsuit where I can go to the judge and say, give me 6 months, sir, till I prepare the case. So it's every day, every moment of life. That's why they say, did you get this patient within the emergency room within 3 minutes? Did you get to this? Did you do this? Did you prevent the paralysis? Okay, so it's a every moment.
Yeah, definitely hope sustains life, and time is not just money. Time is very, very important in keeping that hope alive. Sometimes if the action that should be taken at a given point of time is not correctly taken, then things go towards the other direction. And talking about time in the context of the finite nature of the human form that we have, it brings us to another question where we talk about the purpose of life. And many times we just wear some set ideas or targets which the environment, which the society gives us, and run with it. We don't allow ourselves the time to think about what is my real potential or what is the purpose of life. And so when something like this happens, people allow themselves a kind of pause to reflect upon the life of someone who has departed, as well as they start thinking about what is happening to me, what am I here to do. Bandhuji, anything on those lines that you may want to say?
About other people accomplishing and the other person who's watching the accomplishments taking a time off, is that what it is?
About re-evaluating the way you are leading your life because someone you see has gone.
Well, I believe it all depends upon one's attachment to one's own things, including one's own body. Raman Maharshi has repeatedly told us in Updesh Saram, in Satdarshanam, that detachment is the way to understand the self. And I think if one tries to practice, and if blessings be there of a guru such as Raman Maharshi, that one begins to really feel a little detached from earthly possessions, whether they be professional, whether they be material, whether they be your house or your relatives or your own life. If one is blessed to be detached from it, then one does not have to compare oneself to anything. Because not only about others, we tend to compare ourselves as if a milestone after milestone, we compare our own past with our current life. And we continue to struggle to strive to do better than I've done in the past, let alone of others, even our own self. We are so deeply attached to our being in the worldly sense that we forget that the real being is not this world. This is just the Maya, this is just Mithya, this is just a Jagat with its activity. So I think if one is detached and is blessed to be detached, then one doesn't have to worry about any milestones or any comparisons at all. One should be happier when one loses something rather than one wins something. I would even go up to the extent of saying that we are looking at the negative of life as a positive, and we rejoice things that we should actually be shunning. We should be away from the worldliness of things, and we do not, because we are lost in this jagat of activity. As Bhagwan Raman Maharshi has said in the very second verse of Updesh Saram, Kriti Mahodadhav Patana Karanam Phalama Shashvatam Gati Nirodhakam. Why do you immerse yourself again in this vast ocean of activity? Don't you know that the result you get from your activity is going to be only temporary, and on top of that, it is going to be a hindrance to your own growth or progress. Gati Nirodhakam. So, if we are detached, we don't have to compare ourselves to anything, and we should be blessed not to compare. That's what my reflection is.
Bandhuji talks about the importance of detachment, and he talks about doing away from the worldliness. But I believe majority of us are happy calling ourselves as worldly beings, and we look at people who talk about detachment as people who are living life towards the other side of the track where we are leading our lives. And when Dr. Kukar talks about hope sustains life, we look at hope as the hope of getting something, the hope of gaining something. But when Bandhuji and Dennis talks about hope, probably there is a difference. Is there any difference, Dennis? Because people look at hope as their enthusiasm moves them, and they go after gaining some more achievements.
So they say, hope springs eternally. It's a wonderful saying. That means that hope continues even in devastation of societies. People will come up with some hope, will come into their mind, spring into their mind, and they'll try to aspire for something better. And what are they looking for? They're simply looking for happiness. We're all looking for happiness. So it's a matter of discriminating what gives real happiness, what doesn't, what gives temporary happiness, and what gives suffering. So, sometimes what gives us happiness at one point gives us suffering at another point. Let's say if you have many people have this experience. They come to me and they say, I'm having so much trouble with my son. He's doing this and I'm suffering so much. But when that boy was a little boy, they gave him so much joy. Now it's giving him so much suffering. So there's these contrasts going on all the time. So what gives happiness always? That's what we should look for. What gives undiluted happiness? And if one looks for that, one will come to a different sense of what the purpose of life is. And to realize that purpose of life, one has to inquire, one has to go through these different experiences, one has to try. They should look at life as like an experiment. Experiment in what is the best, what is the greatest, what is the good, and what gives the true happiness, and what helps people the most. So everyone has to go through it themselves and ask these questions, and should take incentive to try to resolve these questions. And that will often bring a person to maybe the spiritual life, trying to find out something about eternal happiness. No one can imagine themselves dead. Everyone can imagine non-being. You can't imagine it. So there's something eternal within every one of us. You can't imagine non-existence. That's because we are existence always. So what is our real nature of existence? We dream, and we have a life in the dream. We think that dream is real, and that dream, everything is real. Waking state doesn't exist. Deep sleep doesn't exist. But that dream, everything is real. Then we wake up and we negate the reality of that dream. And the dream negates the reality of the waking state. Then we go into deep sleep, and there's no awareness of a body, no awareness of an individual, yet we exist. We wake up and say, I slept happily. So what is that existed throughout these three states? That we have to find out. That's our true self. Everyone should try to know themselves before trying to know everything else in the world. So that's what a seeker does. He tries to find out what is true, what is eternal, what is not temporary. So some people have that aspiration and hope that they can experience that truth or that reality. And on hope, they aspire, they practice, they do sadhana and tapas in the spiritual field. Or with that hope, they try to do any type of work in life to give them fulfillment. Either it's a teacher or someone having an ITV program. So they're trying to have happiness and fulfillment. So what gives permanent happiness? That's what we should be looking for. And some will say it doesn't exist in this world. There's the sweets, and there's the sour. We have to have both. And that's true in life, in the worldly life. But there's something beyond the world. There's something that transcends even the mind and thought, which is our nature, which can be experienced, which is ourself. So that's what we have to seek and try to know and understand. That's the royal path, they call it, to enlightenment or to pure understanding of who we are.
Pure understanding of who we are, and the understanding which Dr. Narinder Kukar might have grown with. And I think if I make a distinction between the spiritually more inclined individuals and those, I think majority are not spiritually inclined. And when he is talking about eternal happiness, that is not what we are teaching our kids. We want them to make more money or be successful in the profession that they have chosen. And will they ever be in tune to everlasting happiness Do you think we have a focus on that side as society?
Let me take on this detachment and then I'll come to your question. You know, detachment has been described, if I'm not mistaken, in a little bit of a different way. A father has a responsibility to raise his kids. A husband has a responsibility to provide. A teacher has a responsibility to teach. A doctor has a responsibility to treat. In other words, it is do thy duty, reward is not thy concern. If that is what you meant by detachment, then that is the detachment public can understand. Otherwise, it will be very hard to understand a detachment. So that's a detachment. I am doing my duty. And when I do my duty, sir, I am happy. Because I am doing my duty, reward is not my concern. As coming to the question that we are not doing this to the kids present, I have a little different take. In fact, in the United States, we do this more to the kids. We say, bete, whatever makes you happy, do that. So we are telling him, it's not important to be a damn doctor, not important to be IV TV anchor. Do what pleases you. If it pleases you to be a priest, God bless you. If it pleases you to be a cleaning person, but be the best cleaning man, be the best teacher, and be the best priest. So we are telling in the United States more. I don't know about the rest of the world. I know about India and United States a little bit. So I'm really more hopeful about this, that we are telling, I am sure you're telling your own kids without realizing, bete, whatever makes you feel happy. Beti, whatever makes you feel happy. We have even gone a step further in the Western world. Whosoever you like to choose to marry, we are happy. Okay? So I would take a little different take, sir.
So now, when Dr. Kukar mentioned about responsibility and happiness of doing one's duty, and if we bring the reference of death somewhere here, so many times we invest all that we have in taking care of the responsibilities. So are we missing something? Maybe there is something more to life than just this side which we call as responsibility, Bandhuji?
Well, Bhagwan Raman Maharshi has said that body will go through the activities it is destined to go through. You will not be able to control it because that's prarabdha. He has said it very clearly, do not try to fight it, but try and detach yourself from it so that, just as Dr. Saab just now said, that it's the duty, dharma, as we would say in scriptural terminology. So that dharma has to be done. Whatever is required of you to be done for your child or spouse or your employer or employee, whatever may be the condition or situation, you have to fulfill that. That is the karma you have to go through. There's no doubt about it. What Gita has said and what Bhagavan has said in Upadesh Saram, again I refer to that, is not to be attached to the result of that. And that's all we can do. And that's where the crux of the matter comes. Whether we are mature enough to understand, and therefore linking it to even the blow, as we call it. If you lose a job, it's a blow. If you get divorced, it's a blow. If you don't get something that you are wishing to get, it's a blow. Similarly, death is the biggest blow. But if we mature ourselves and we practice detachment for almost everything that our life goes through, then I believe it helps us to mitigate that pain, to manage that pang of separation from our relative or loved one, because it's a beautiful journey forward. They have ended one small intermission, one small aspect of this journey of life, which should end, as I said earlier, completely forever. but we are not mature enough, we are not ripe enough, like a sage, to be self-realized. So it is good when something comes to an end, it's a time to rejoice. It's good to embrace death. As Khalil Gibran has said, river and ocean are just two parts of the same thing. It's part of a stream, part of a water. So this life is a part of the ultimate cycle. And when it ends, it should not be a sad moment. It should not be a moment to lament about it.
So what makes it sad, especially for the individual who is leaving all that is available by virtue of being alive, many times is his unfulfilled desires or the dreams which remained somewhere halfway fulfilled. Dennis, we have that Mahamrityunjay mantra in which also there are references that when it is ripe, then the fruit falls. Trayambakam yajamahi. So, what precaution or what suggestion you may have so that that stage can be avoided? That you are now going to go, but there is so much of the sense of not having been able to do this, that. So there is a there is a continuation of a sense of stress as you are going to the other side.
Well, it doesn't happen to everyone. There's many people who die, which you have seen, probably you have seen, that have peace with themselves and the world at the time of death. They accept death. But as far as having unresolved desires or unfulfilled desires or some anxiety at the time of the death, that's what happens when you can't control your thoughts. If you practice controlling your thoughts or you meditate and have some spiritual practice like that, at the time of death or at the time of any difficulty, what is death? What is sorrow? Sorrow is just an unwanted thought. Some thought keeps coming into your mind which you don't want, but persist and cause you suffering. What is it? It's an unwanted thought. In deep sleep, you don't experience it because there's no thoughts. You have no sorrow. But you come to the waking state, that thought comes back. So if you practice the control of thoughts, you can control sorrow. Also, you can have happiness and peace, which is your true nature, which springs up from within when there's no thoughts. So the answer, while one has the ability, one should make the effort to turn the mind inward towards God, towards the self, and attain that equipoise in life and within. So whatever calamities may come to the person, it won't affect the person. He'll have peace. Because he'll understand that whatever happens, happens because it's already destined to happen. You tried your best to avoid it, but you couldn't avoid it. You can say, according to the theory of karma, this is going to happen, even though you tried your best to avoid it. So you accept it, and you're at peace. And the loss or gain of anything is not the purpose of life. It's to know who you are. To realize your eternal nature is the purpose of life. For a sadhaka, it's very simple and straight. So that's the answer.
So wonderful. Just last a minute or so, and how to be ready for that final moment. Dr. Kukar, if you think about it briefly, what would you say?
Adaptability is a wonderful concept and a gift given by God to mankind. We adopt. We adopt. When a young kid dies, we feel very bad. When we compare it to a young married man, we feel even more sad because he left a widow or a thing. When we consider a young man who died leaving kids behind, we feel even more sorrow. When we see somebody who had kids but they are educated, and in Indian system all the kids are married, we say at least he has taken care of his responsibilities. And when he dies as a grandfather and all kids are settled, we say God was kind. And when he is 95 and is, God forbid, suffering, and God takes him, we say, God, thank God for taking him away at this time. So it depends when death takes place, whose death it is. It's all comparative. And to console a person, they say, when in Indian culture, they come, they talk about their sorrow, they talk about this, they talk about somebody else's death, which was worse than what you and me have suffered at that time. That's a consolation process. That's an adaptability. You look at the sorrow and sadness of others, and it becomes a comparative thing. My sorrow is less than the others. Okay, I'm all right. I'm okay.
So I think just briefly, based on what I hear from Dr. Kukar, Dennis and Bandhuji, I would say that in some strange way, while it is taking someone away, it is also bringing us near to understand life with a little bit more awareness about all that it has to offer in terms of relationships, as well as in terms of what our real contribution could be for ourselves as well as for the world around us. I appreciate Dr. Narinder Kukar for joining us, Bandhuji and Dennis Hartel. Such a pleasure having all of you with us. With a little bit of more insight on leading and moving towards a fulfilling life with lots of good wishes. Thanking all of you for being with us. This is Ashok Vyas.